What's up, legends? We're here to discuss the final episode of Skeleton Crew, episode 8, and share my feelings about the show as a whole towards the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. We pick up where we left off of Jod emerging from the vault and meeting the kids' parents for the first time, and he basically has them completely convinced that he is actually this Republic emissary coming to collect a shipment of credits. He states that the children are in a good deal of trouble and makes the parents and the children go back to their homes under house arrest, while Fern and her mom go along with Jod to go see the supervisor. They go up to the supervisor's tower, which is a familiar setting for us because we've actually seen the ruins of this at a previous planet that they visited, and we see a room that's completely untouched. It seems to be one that nobody has visited for quite a long time, but we finally get to see who the supervisor is, and it turns out it's just a droid. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little bit let down by this. I really think they could have done something a little bit more interesting. As I talked about in previous episodes, I thought that they were going to make Captain Renaud the supervisor who had taken over, but hey, I guess it's just the simplest explanation is that it's a droid kind of running things. The supervisor tells Jod, "I must admit, I was worried that an emissary was never going to visit our mint again," which was kind of reminiscent for me of when Obi-Wan first arrives on Kamino, and it's kind of what the Kaminoans say to him, assuming that he is this Jedi coming to check on the progress of the clones. Now, Jod is also masquerading as a Jedi, and the supervisor apparently had received a transmission back from Order 66 stating that all Jedis were traitors of the Republic. So the supervisor is actually quite a bit savvy and determines that Jod is actually lying, and of course Fern confirms it by yelling out that he's actually a pirate. Jod then ignites his lightsaber and thrusts it into the eye of the supervisor, which completely destroys the system and shuts down all of the droids as well. Not only this, but all the power in the entire city goes out. So he basically threatens Fern's mom, telling her to destroy the barrier, but she begs him not to destroy it entirely, but that she can override it so that his crew can pass through the barrier without being shocked by their security system. We see the pirate ship descend onto the planet and barrage the city with cannon fire. But with the AT-AT droids now out of commission, the kids are able to escape their homes. KB and Neil show up on speeder bikes at Wim's home. Wim's dad, of course, doesn't want to get involved, but Wim steals a speeder bike, and the three kids go off together, but Wim's dad does chase after them, hijacking another speeder bike and then catching up with them. Here we see a very fun chase scene where the pirates are chasing after the kids on speeder bikes. Of course, they kind of go into the forest, and we get to kind of see a cool progression, even just in these, probably 10 minutes or so, of the progression of Wim's dad, who is, again, initially very reluctant to even get involved, to actually finding the thrill in this speeder chase as they launch over a ravine in the forest. Up until now, the dad has been a very straight-laced, kind of button up sort of guy, and you see him finally kind of come out of his shell and embrace the adventure that his son has been on this entire time. Now, during the speeder bike chase, they actually cut through the kids' school, and what you may remember from the episode 4, I believe, where they visit Ad Atkin, this was actually the location of the rebel base that they had kind of spent a little bit of time with, and that's where Neil learns from the girl, I can't remember her name, that there's actually like a cannon on the top of the roof. So as they're riding through the school, Neil gets knocked off, but he tells them go on without him, and he basically goes up to man this cannon, and later on he's able to kind of shoot against the pirate ship for a little bit. But the rest of them finally get to the Onyx Cinder, and their plan is that if they can just get up past the barrier, they can send a message to Kim, who before had told them that she would help in any way, and they know that they can contact the Republic to send X-Wings and come to their aid. The problem is the ship is locked to the landing pad, and they need to restore the power to the grid in order for them to escape. Now at this point, Wim's dad is fully on board, and he kind of delivers the funny line that, "Son, you're talking to a level 7 systems coordinator here. I can go and restore the power." So they go up to the supervisor tower where again Fern and Fern's mom and Jod still are, and so Wim and Fern are basically trying to distract Jod while Wim's dad is able to work on restoring the power. Now what I find funny here is that despite going on this adventure and seeing some character growth for Wim, his personality ultimately has remained the same. He is brave, he has the heart, but he's really just not that savvy. And we see that once again here where he's trying to make up this story to tell Jod and basically distract him, and Jod is just not buying it for a second. But they are finally able to restore power, and so KB is able to lift off in the ship, and we see that she has the help of SM-33, who is still decapitated, but he's able to work, I guess, well enough to fly the ship. She is successful in getting the message out to Kim, but only afterwards she is shot down by one of the pirates. And here we see a kind of dramatic scene where the ship, you can kind of see it going to crash, and you see a little bit of dust kind of come up, but honestly it's not really that believable in my opinion that she dies here, even though all the kids are like screaming out and just worried that she's dead. Honestly, I feel like as a viewer you just don't buy it for a second. First of all, she's one of the main characters, and just to kill her off screen with barely even an explosion for this crash, like, yeah, obviously she's still alive. Now real quick guys, if you've been enjoying these breakdowns of Skeleton Crew, do me a favor, hit that like button for this video, and please consider subscribing below to support the channel. Back in the supervisor's tower, Jod tells Wim, Fern, and their parents that none of this even matters because if the X-Wings show up, they're not even going to be able to get through the barrier. To which Wim and Fern then basically try and go for the lever that's going to destroy the barrier entirely. And just when Wim is about to pull the lever, Jod pulls out his lightsaber and puts it to his dad's neck. And here Jod goes on a little bit of a monologue talking about just how hard his life has been, and we learn a little bit about his backstory now that he was actually found by a Jedi who was basically running for her life from Order 66 essentially, and so she had taught Jod some of the ways of the Force only before being executed right in front of him. And this was one of the last plot threads that we had yet to find an answer to, and honestly I'm content with it. I think it makes a lot of sense for Jod to not necessarily be a youngling or be a Jedi, but he was taught by a Jedi who was running from the Empire at the time, and Jod, who basically grew up in poverty and then sees his friend or his master executed in front of him, it kind of makes sense why he would turn out to be the bad guy in the end. Well, anyway, Wim does take his hand off the lever to save his dad, to which Wim's dad actually builds up the courage to go up and punch Jod, and so this kind of causes a big scuffle between all of them where they're trying to reach for the lever, but in the end it's actually Farah, who up until this point has just been paralyzed in fear not only of Jod but also in fear of the outside world and people discovering AT-ATN. She works up the confidence to actually be the one to pull the lever. And I definitely like this element of this episode. We basically see, at least for Wim's dad and Fern's mom, we see the kids who have finally kind of come into their own by this episode. They've kind of learned to work together, they've learned to pilot a ship, they've learned to be courageous. Now they're the ones who have become the guides for their parents and trying to help them basically overcome their fear. At this point, the entire barrier disappears, and it turns out that the barrier actually does encompass all of the clouds around AT-ATN, and it seems like it was artificially generated. And so that completely disappears, and all of the citizens of AT-ATN are able to stare up at the sky and see the stars probably for the very first time. Jod throws down his blaster because he knows he's been beaten. We see the ships from the New Republic swarm in and destroy all of the pirate ships, and the last we see of Jod is him staring out the window as his ship burns and falls to the ground. The kids all rush to where the Onyx Cinder had crashed to make sure that KB is alright, and of course, again, we as the viewers, I don't think we ever had any question whether or not she'd be okay, but I think they use this as a plot device to basically get the kids back together. So we do finally get to see them reunite, and it's kind of cool seeing them just surrounded by all this gold that's spilling out of the ship, and we even see that SM-33 is also alright, and everyone is back together again. Where at the beginning of the show, Fern and Wim were complete strangers and even kind of opposite each other in a lot of ways. It's obvious that now they actually are friends, and we see this by Fern teasing Wim that, hey, you're not gonna have to worry about taking those assessments anymore. And so of course Wim smirks, he looks up to the stars, which are now visible from Ad-Aden, and we cut to credits. I'll tell you what, guys, I have to say I really like this show. I think there was maybe only one episode that I didn't like from the entire series, which is pretty great. As I mentioned before, I felt like the acting, especially from the kids, was maybe a little bit weak in those first few episodes, but we saw it progressively get a lot better, and I think they actually did a really great job, especially by the end. And not to mention, all of the scenes with Jude Law's character were just phenomenal. He really brought a lot to the show, and I wouldn't be surprised if he really actually worked with these kids a little bit during the show to help them actually improve their craft. The visuals for this show were absolutely on point, and I especially loved them in this final episode here. I've talked about this before, but there's also a good bit of humor in this show, and maybe a little bit more than we've come to expect from like the original trilogy, but I feel like it's still on par with what we come to expect from Star Wars. Again, I've talked about this in a previous video, but Star Wars has a very distinct level of humor. It's not over the top, it's not slapstick. It tends to be a lot more subtle, and I feel like this show really accomplished that very well for the majority of the episodes, and it really didn't distract from the show. It actually added to it and made it a lot more fun and lighthearted. And with that, one thing I did want to address about this, because I know a lot of people have called this a kids show, and if you haven't watched Skeleton Crew but you've somehow watched all of my breakdowns of it, I at least want to encourage you, this is not a kids show. If anything, it's a family show. It's one that can be enjoyed by, I think, children and adults alike. It's not, again, a kids show for Star Wars is like, I think, the Clone Wars, or like some of the other ones they've come out with, Resistance. Even though some of those shows, even like Clone Wars, have some of those darker themes, they still are the sort of shows that you would watch on a Saturday morning like we used to do when we were kids. But this is not like that. This show was definitely made for adults and kids, and I think it's really good for that in a lot of ways. If you think about it, I think the original film, Star Wars A New Hope, I think kind of falls in a similar category. Obviously, the main protagonists are meant to be these four children, but that necessarily doesn't make it a children's show. And so I would just encourage you, if you have been debating whether or not you wanted to watch this, you thought it might be too kiddie, I really don't think so. I think you're going to really enjoy it. It's really a fantastic space adventure with, you know, a little bit of humor sprinkled in there, some intrigue, and just some really cool themes that we've seen, of course, from other franchises. But I think if you grew up watching movies like Hook, or like Princess Bride, and yes, of course, The Goonies, then I think you're going to really enjoy this show. And to be completely honest, this show was 10 times better than The Goonies, in my opinion. And I will say too, again, with people kind of initially comparing this to The Goonies, and it also seemed like they're kind of going like a Treasure Island, Treasure Planet sort of vibe with it, it really did not, it wasn't predictable in the way that you would think. The way I thought they were going to play it was making Jod this kind of pirate bad guy, and then slowly make him the likable hero that helps these kids get home, but that's not the way they did it. It kind of subverted our expectations, but actually in a good way, by making him in the end the actual villain, and these kids are basically, it's them against him. I think one of my main gripes with the show overall was really just the length of the episodes. Like, I just don't understand why they do this for these Disney Plus shows, just making them like literally some of them, when you include the credits, are like about more like 20 minutes, 25 minutes long. Even this finale was only about 30-35 minutes long in the end. I just didn't feel like that was entirely necessary. I felt like they could have slowed down a few scenes here and there, and as I talked about from episode 4, like that episode probably could have been an hour-long episode where they actually explored the other planet Ad-Atkin a little bit more and what had gone on there. But in spite of all that, with the exception of that one episode, I felt like the pacing was actually pretty good. Like, it's pretty jam-packed going from one thing to the next, and it didn't necessarily feel rushed, but again, I feel like they could have slowed it down a little bit and drawn it out if they really wanted to. And I think maybe even this finale, and especially, I think I would have been okay seeing a little bit of a longer ending to see how things ended off after the X-Wings had kind of defeated the pirates and that sort of thing. But then again, it also wasn't a bad ending. I actually really liked the last episode, and like I said, I enjoyed the series as a whole. And it looks like we may still have some open-endedness that they could do a season 2. So I don't know if they're planning on it. I keep debating back and forth whether or not that would be a good idea. Like, sometimes you just gotta let a good thing stand on its own, and sometimes, you know, coming out with multiple sequels can kind of ruin different shows or different movie franchises. So I don't know. I guess I'd be curious to see what they could do, because obviously Jod, he could have potentially escaped, or they could possibly see him go to trial, and then maybe he escapes somehow from there. And honestly, you probably could have a whole series just on his character if you didn't even want to include the kids. That would be a possibility as well. Because again, even though he did end up being the bad guy, he is such an intriguing character, and one that I wouldn't mind seeing more of. You have this kind of just scoundrel Force user who's running around the galaxy looking for treasure. Maybe we almost could potentially see like a Loki series similar to where he was the bad guy, but maybe he actually becomes the good guy for a new series. I don't know. These are just some things I've been thinking about. But as always, guys, really appreciate you watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the whole series of Skeleton Crew in the comments below, and let me know, did the finale live up to your expectations? Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe below to support the channel, and check out one of our other breakdowns here if you missed them before. And lastly, I want to let you know that no matter what you're going through, you are not alone. God is with you, and He loves you, and we do too. I'll catch you next time.